able to. Hi, everyone. It's really, really good. I wish I could see every single person here, but I'm grateful to watch the Q&A as well as the chat to see how rich the conversation is already, as well as how many resources are pouring in. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sumun Pendakur. I am the Chief Learning Officer at the USC Race and Equity Center. The last 20 years of my career has been focused on building community strength as well as institutional capacity for social justice and racial justice in the higher education sector. So that's kind of where I come into this conversation. I also want to center this, and I really appreciate Halima's remarks so very much, but I'm first and foremost, in addition to being a career woman and activist, all those things, I'm a mom of 2 brown babies, and so I appreciate my comrades who are writing in about where do we take our kids, because that's a big part of our life as well. And I'm also married to a brown man. Some of you know him. His name's Sunil Malhotra. He's an actor and a writer. And so I want to locate this sort of brief set of remarks in what does it mean to radically think about our humanity as concretely linked through a meaningful set of actions to the demands by the Black Lives Matter movement, but more specifically to center what does it mean to actually say Black Lives Matter. That has obviously become a rallying cry for the last number of years, and people are very quick to hashtag it. But in terms of actual concrete actions, we see a range of things that are emerging out of that. And I want to just give a small example from today. Folks, can you still hear me? I'm hoping so.
I can still hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
I was thinking a lot today about the Blackout Tuesday moment. And I think that there are obviously good reasons to take a pause and to recenter Black voices in a day like today. On the flip side, this, I think, locates us and communities who are not Black in some really specific ways. One, in what ways does this actually suppress the attempt to actually have dialogue, to engage in education? In fact, many Black Lives Matter activists and community members are saying this isn't actually helping us. So there's something to be thought of there before we jump onto any sort of hashtag activism, number one. And number two, the posting of a Black image to replace your own image, and you probably saw this from a lot of your friends and family members, cannot replace action. I don't have anything against the replacing of your own image with a Black image in order to provoke a conversation or to say something that. But it can never replace concrete action. And I'm talking about what does it mean to do something that goes beyond that moment? The reason is because all of you who are involved in this know that this is a lifelong struggle, and it will be a lifelong struggle, and our children's lifelong struggles, because the entire foundation of this country is founded on the genocide of indigenous peoples and the enslavement of African peoples. And the country has never fully grappled with either of those things, and therefore will never be able to heal itself from its original sins and its original ills. So knowing that that's the context, what does it mean to do and take daily action or regular action in the sense of a marathon versus a sprint? In moments like this, when we feel a fervor rise up, how do we both stay centered with that, but also conserve energy to be able to do this over the lifespan? And I'm talking to you, I don't know how many folks on here are in your 20s versus your 40s versus your 60s. I'm 44. I'm very sleep deprived because of the 2 little ones. And so some of my remarks are coming from that, all right? So a couple of different things. When we think about the layers, and I appreciated the way that Halima talked about, 4 different ways to concretely rip apart anti-Blackness. And I think any work that we take in terms of concrete action has to begin with self-examination. And when I say self-examination, I don't just mean, oh, who am I? What are my privileges? What are my forms of subordination? I can clearly name that I am a brown, cisgendered woman, able-bodied, middle class, highly educated, blue US citizen passport holder, all of these various things. And that still doesn't necessarily mean that I have done the extreme work that it takes to unpack how many things I get simply by being those things. I didn't have to do anything. That's the whole nature of the meaning of privilege, right? Unearned, unasked for sets of advantages accrued to me, accrued to you because of the relationship of parts of your identity to the power delivered in this particular nation state. So when I say self-examination, some really critical interrogation of not just what do I get simply from being me? And how do I redistribute that more equitably, number one, and destabilize those forms of power? And then two, where did I get my learning? Where did I learn about what it means to be different? What did I learn about power? What did I learn about systemic and structural violence? You know this, so many of you who are tuned in today, how many people in our own community are very, very quick to jump onto, well, I'm Desi and a Black person was mean to me, therefore everybody is racist. Okay, we as a community need to have some very clear understandings of the difference between interpersonal prejudice, which anyone can manifest because we are all deeply biased and flawed individuals, versus structural and systemic violence on every single level. And until we've done that work, we continue to fall back. And as I'm seeing in the chat itself on colorism, or those people were mean to me, or et cetera, et cetera. So we end up collapsing in unnuanced ways how structural and systemic violence actually impacts multiple minoritized communities. So that's number one, self-examination. The other thing that I'd offer is, what is your particular role? I'm gonna see if Bhavani has given me screen share privileges. She has, thank you, Bhavani. Give me one sec, folks. Somebody in the Q&A asked, I think, a useful question, which is, how do I be a better ally today when I haven't necessarily been an activist in the past? I think that's a fair question. I think that's also a source of frustration, you know, sort of from folks in multiple communities who are like, where have you been this whole time? This entire country has been jacked from its inception, so where have you been? But as an educator, my heart is always situated on, if you're here now, where are we going to go with you? And where can you go as an individual? And so I think, in addition to self-examination, figuring out what your role is. What vantage points do you have? What's in your sphere of influence to control, add to, build on? This is critically important. Let me actually share the screen here. I just wanted to share a graphic.
Can everyone see it?
Are you able to see it?
Yes, I think they are, yeah.
Yes, we are, yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. So this is created by Deepa Iyer and by the Building Movement Project. And I'm sure many of you have seen this, especially those of you who are active in the Twitter sphere. But I think this, as well as the article that goes with it, that breaks down each one of these roles, is incredibly valuable, because no single person in a movement, in a lifelong movement for justice, should or can play the same roles. Some of you may be completely on the front lines, as our colleague Bezad was talking about earlier. Phenomenal. Some of you might be the people making resources for people who are getting pepper sprayed in the face. Some of you might be educators and working with children who are fifth graders, helping them to be anti-racist. So figuring out what is your role in a lifelong movement and doing the work within that role to say, how do I cultivate the most anti-racist practice and praxis, number one, and how do I continue to listen to people who are not like me, who experience the power differential differently, and to add that into my knowledge and into my toolbox. And of course, there's so much beautiful reading to be done. There's already been some great resources shared. So I wanted to share that visual, and of course you can get it from Adipa's Twitter presence, as well as the Building Movement Project as well, and I want to give full attribution. This is not mine. Let me stop sharing.
You got it.
And I just have two more quick thoughts here. So if you're figuring out that not all activism has to look the same, then what is your activism? What does your organizing look like? I read from a wonderful colleague, Diane Ojie, who's been actively involved in the Asian American organizing space for decades now. And she was talking about, if this is a marathon, figuring out what your role is. And if you can't go to the protest this week, don't berate yourself and don't think that's the only way to be involved. It's beautiful if you can, but if you can't, donate to a bail fund, number one, right? Share anti-racist training tools with one another. Have the conversation with your mom, your auntie, your taya, your kaki, your chikama, whoever it might be, who says, oh, well, you know, if they just weren't looting, then I'd be more on their side. Or, you know, if they just protested like Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi, I could really get behind this. And of course, you may have your brain exploding at that moment, but figuring out the way to marshal your creative resources to talk to Chikama or Dodama or whoever you're talking to say, let's pull that apart. Where did you get those ideas? How did you come to think about Martin Luther King in this particular way? What do you think the protesters and activists and organizers are actually doing? Who do you think's actually propagating so much of the violence? Answer, it's the police. They're instigating heavily, as our colleagues have already said. So having those deep conversations. A great example, and probably many of you saw, is Rahul Dubey just yesterday in Washington, D.C., as the police, armed to the teeth, by the way, with militarized weapons that they are bringing back after nearly 20 years of killing brown people across the world, right? This is all connected. They're using that same weaponry to box people in. Rahul Dubey opened up his home for almost 70 activists and protesters to shelter there overnight, while the police were spraying through his house with tear gas and pepper spray. That's really powerful. Each one of us can have a role. It does not need to look the same. And then finally, one last thought. We as Desis, as South Asians, have deep anti-Blackness to uproot and to pull out and to burn on so many different levels. And that manifests in a lot of different ways. Halima mentioned colorism. It's not just colorism. It is especially for those of you who identify as of Hindu faith, Hindu upbringing, Hindu adjacent. The depth of prejudice that comes out of casteism and Brahminical stances is so high, and so many immigrant Desis and their children benefit from that caste status. So these pieces are all interrelated and interlinked. And so this is why this is cyclical, because for every action you take to go back to the self-examination, to figure out where this deep-rooted bias comes from, to continue the action sets, and then to engage, engage, engage. And I'll give you one final example as something small. Sunil and I, every single election time, we do really deep research. All of our friends actually ask for this in advance of the election, but we do all of the down ballot, down ticket research, as well as for all the judges, and we post up an election guide for anyone who trusts our opinions and our judgment. You can pick something, one thing, 5 things, 10 things. And for those of you who are asking about taking kids to rallies and protests, we've taken our kids, just like my parents took me, to every rally and protest when I was younger. They've gone to Black Lives Matter protests, they've gone to anti-children at the border protests, they've gone to women's marches, they've gone to anti-gun rallies, and they will be going to these marches too. So thank you so much for the time. Thank you, Bhavani, for inviting me, and in solidarity, folks.